Hello, hello. This project was unique, challenging, but a super fun build. It started out as a rough sketch or an idea, turned into a refined drawing with the direction that I was after, and ultimately a rendering created as an SVG file. My goal was to build a 53 by 90 inch barn door that included this marquetry or inlay motif with dyed veneers. And this thing is large. You can see it on my workbench there, and here it is on my sliding table saw. These are from Sauers Veneer. Larry Sauers is one awesome dude. He was extremely helpful and patient as I figured out the colors that I needed. So yeah, dyed veneers combined with a shaper origin turned into a very interesting project. Let's get out in my shop and get going. So I've been working on a project now, trying to get everything figured out with the shaper origin. Working with the guys with Shaper, Eric and Sean. Those guys are fantastic. And this is 1/42 of an inch veneer. And I know these squiggly lines don't make any sense, but they're actually sections of this, which is a very large panel. And this section here was some of this tree where it marries to this hill in the background. And I started with an 1/8 inch bit with 0 offset and hooked that together, and it came out okay, but the material is a little wrinkled from the stresses of all the different areas going together. So then I use an 1/8 inch bit with negative offset, which means I'm cutting a little bit, 1/1000th of an inch more off this piece and 1/1000th of an inch more off of this piece. Hooked those together, and that worked a little bit better. And then talking with Sean and Eric, we decided to go with a 1/16th of an inch bit. It's a 1/16th of an inch downcut spiral. The thing is tiny. And did a negative 2/1000 offset, and this came out beautiful. And you can see how it's not even wrinkled, and that's nice and flush. Everything's going together. So yeah, a lot of experimenting to figure out bit sizes, offsets, and all that. But we're getting there. Trying to get everything figured out so that we can start making all these cuts and everything's going to fit. This is such a large motif. This is about 43 by 80 tall, so it's really big. So all these pieces have to fit really good. If you start forcing it to go together in one area, it'll just compound cumulatively, and the whole thing will end up into a wrinkled mess. So we had to figure that out. And here's that 1/16th downcut spiral. I want to show you real quick. So some of the tricks in my tool bag are, the big one is this Easy Tack spray adhesive. I'll talk about this a little bit in the video here and there, but this stuff is vital to make this process work. Couple of rollers, of course those painter's spatulas, and there you can see some of the router bits. Although for this particular project, everything was cut with the 1/16th downcut spiral. And all of these items, well except the bits, can probably be picked up at a Michael's or Hobby Lobby. So working with raw veneers, raw commercial veneers at that thickness or thinness was a major part of the challenge. Veneers that thin don't always want to behave. They're wrinkly, and the machine can't read the z-axis if it's an undulating surface. So yeah, I'll admit there was a bit of trial and error, some mistakes made, but a ton of learning. I am so glad that I didn't give up, because I almost did, to tell you the truth. And now that I'm on the other side of the fence, looking back, seemed easy. And so now I can share this information with you, a couple of tips on how to make things work, like holding that veneer down tight to the wasteboard with that Easy Tack, and another little tip that I'm going to show you here. These things are awesome. These are designed for mixing oil paints or acrylic. But with these guys, I can get underneath this thin veneer. Just take your time here. They'll come up. You just got to be patient. Careful. Just like that. And just start removing these guys, right? Yeah, man. So yeah, a lot of these veneers are too narrow, but easy to stitch them together to get the width I need. All right, check it out. So I'm cutting along and I'm coming around this corner and I'm moving from left to right, and the router stops, like positive stop. So I just stopped, shut it off. I assumed what happened, and I was right. You can see this kind of lifted up. So I just got some of that Easy Tack, sprayed it on a scrap of veneer, put it underneath there, and then I can just prop that open for a few minutes, let that kind of tack up, and then roll it down. It's like contact cement, but it's what they call, I gotta show this over and over because it is so amazing for something like this. Repositionable adhesive, 70-20. Fabulous. So, and of course with the Shaper Origin, I can simply come back to the position and keep going right where I left off. So initially I planned on spraying the wasteboard with the Easy Tack so I wouldn't have adhesive glue on the back of the veneer, which I thought might interfere with the whatever adhesive I'm going to be gluing these to the substrate. Well, I found out that I could use lacquer thinner to clean this off, and it's such a fine mist. You can just, I'm just lightly going over it and it takes it off. That is awesome. So now this dude will be going in here like so. Yeah, update. Even though you can get the glue off the back of the veneer, it's best to just spray the wasteboard. This is so fantastic, getting all these little pieces stitched together, and it amazes me that this machine can cut all these intricate details so accurately. And what I'm doing with the blue tape is primarily putting it where there's a space and pulling that gap tight. All right, fantastic progress, but I want to show you. So this little piece crumbled into 3 pieces, and I dropped one of them, and it's already tiny. And then this one, I couldn't find it. It disappeared. No big shake. And so I'm just gonna bring up this, this file, and then cut just that little piece, and then, fit them in place. So let's do that. I loaded that file, and now what I can do is find the areas that I need. You can see it highlight right there. I need this little area there. So I'm just going to move the dust shield and kind of mark where I need that one piece. And then the other one was this little area right in there. Just kind of mark that. And I think this will work.
So I have a piece of veneer here. Where did I mark? Right there. I'm just gonna put it like that so there's plenty of surface for the router base. And then another piece here. I've already sprayed a little glue on here. This guy will go here somewhere. I should be able to get. I just need those little pieces, just the tips, right? All right.
Right in there. I just need that. I'll cut it big and then make a seam. So I'm sure it's easy to see that some of those vulnerable areas are typically cross-grain, but they're easy to fix. And here in a bit, I'll show you a trick to mitigate this problem. And boom, one there and there. I can just cut these a little bit wild with my knife, use a scalpel or a chisel, to make a good seam. And then just treat it like a little inlay. So what I got going now is I'm taking these apart. These have been dry assembled just to make sure everything's fitting, and fixing little areas that maybe a piece broke off, like right here. No big shake. Taking this back apart, and just got to be super careful. It's fragile at this point, but then I can start to glue sections and start to put it together. Hello. So I thought I'd show you the state of the shop this morning. I'm working on this new project and things are going really well. These are parts being cut out with a Shaper Origin. This is 1/42 of an inch veneer. This is my assembly table. I just have it sitting on these sawhorses. And this thing's about 54 by a little over 7 foot wide, long. And covered with Formica, made of 1/2 inch plywood. Then it just has this 1.5 inch edge. You can see it there, how it drops down. So it's very lightweight because typically I keep that on top of my vacuum bag, which is over there, just to provide a place for when I'm doing shipping or whatever, and a place to work, lay out, you know, all that. And on top of that, pun, it keeps the bag protected so I don't cut it or something. And this tabletop, it's, you know, smooth, flat, glue resistant, and I can create all these little sub-assemblies, and then I can put those in the vacuum and to keep them flat, because as you're stitching all that together, these tend to start wrinkling and they get stressed and they start to move. Those need to stay flat. So once these are glued and taped together and everything's nice and flush, I put them in the vacuum bag and mash them flat. So, and then here is my Shaper workstation. Basically, you can see the marker tape there, making some cuts, right? So yeah, everything's working well. Beautiful progress. Man, I gotta tell you, it gets exciting when you start to be able to put these puzzle pieces together and they fit. Let's see if this makes sense. So this is tree 3 and this is sky 3. You can see that this little area here will marry with the sky area there. And so this is fall off. I've labeled it sky fall off so that I can use this for all the little pieces that go in this area, and I can keep that grain going straight across so it'll be more cohesive and harmonious. Yeah. Man, I gotta tell you, this is working so well. So I just finished cutting the sky, right? And it's still attached to this 1/4 inch, still in place. And then I removed the black from the other board. It had reference marks. Hold on. These reference marks here, you can kind of see it there, cut straight, all the way across. But really what counts is that I married it to this pink, because this is tacky from the spray adhesive. So I put that in place, everything lines up, tucked this in, that lines up. So now I can remove this 1/4 inch panel, and I have these exact reference marks there, all the way across. There's a little notch right here. There's one down here, and I can straight line that. And this method of cutting at the table saw will produce a much more accurate and beautiful seam between this piece and the next one that I do as I create this sky background. It would be a challenge for the Shaper Origin, since it's a rotary cutting, spinning 1/16 bit, to cut that. It's gonna cut straight and true and accurate, but not like a saw blade will, to make that seam. Hope that makes sense, but man, I am super pleased. So I just wanted to show a close-up. So this is a little notch that was produced with the Shaper Origin. That's part of the file. So that's my reference point to make those straight cuts at the table saw. And before I make these cuts, of course, I'm gonna put this piece in here because it will be getting cut across straight there. There's a little piece there, I believe, and then this one as well. All right, so these dudes, I think they're called pedestal clamps. They get called toggle clamps. Anyway, this little knob here, this is awesome. It makes it toolless adjustment, right? And these are by Clamp Plus. I'll leave a link in the description. Yeah, those are super handy. Anyway, I've got this sled. You can see it's anchored down to my slider. And then with those clamps, a board on the top and a board on the bottom, it'll make really clean cuts and I can make these seams, essentially marrying the sky to the tree files one after another. The exact placement of the blade is super critical, but it's pretty easy to do because I have the little notch that I made with the shaper origin, so I just have to line that little notch up with the blade and make the cut. And of course those little notches are part of the file that go all the way across. I just don't want to cut them all the way across with the shaper origin because I wanted to use the saw. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll show that a close-up of that little notch that I'm talking about that I made with the shaper origin. Okay, yeah, there's a good close-up. And you can see I can just line that notch with the edge of my sled and make a perfect cut. I remember thinking at this stage, yeah, man, this is going to work, you know. It's a little bit of a new process for me, but it's working. And here you can see how the sections, so there's 2 files for section 3, 2 files for section 4, and it's going to marry beautifully. So if your bit is dull, those little cross grain areas will chip off pretty easily. But even if they're not, sometimes it's just vulnerable and it's thin material, so they can break off. Here you can see I just cut those out, and then I just simply use a chisel to make a straight line. Cut the pieces and simply put them in place. They blend very well. All right, so occasionally you're going to find that you're trying to cut a small piece. You can see I've attempted two of them, and they're pretty small. And so they're either getting sucked up in the vacuum, or this little cross grain, fragile cross grain is breaking off. But I'm going to do one more attempt by doing something. Let me show you. Move this here. So I'm going to put another piece of veneer down, and this time I'm going to smear a little bit of glue. This is the back side. And I'll just work that across the grain into those wood fibers really well, right? Let that tack up just a little bit. I'll spray some more of this stuff, easy tack. Face up, of course, and we'll make an attempt to cut it again. Now I couldn't find footage of that accomplishment, but here's a good example. Now this is double bevel marquetry cut by hand, but you can see my pencil lead there and these tiny individual feathers that were cut. Well, those were backed up using glue. Now this piece is like 4.5 inch diameter, pretty small, also double bevel marquetry, but you can see the tiny little details like her mischievous eyebrows and the lines that make up her lips. That was also backed up using glue. So I'm working on fitting these little pieces, and for the most part they're fitting really good. Usually just, you know, straight off the machine and fit them in place. But sometimes they don't for whatever reason. And a lot of times you can arch them up in the middle. This is 1/42 of an inch thick veneer, so pretty thin. You can arch them in the middle, tuck in the ends, and get them to fit. Sometimes they just won't fit. So let me show you what you can do. So I typically use this hot plate with sand to sand shade when I'm doing double bevel marquetry. But here I just want to shrink the veneer slightly. It works amazingly well. Drop it in for a few seconds. It'll shrink, you'll get any moisture out of that piece, and boom, slips right in place. Yeah, man, just like that. Finally, I've got section 2 and section 3, or file 2 and file 3 going here and here. And I've cut all the pieces, put them on here. They were a little bit big in height or width, however you want to look at that. And then I took it all over to the sliding table saw and boom, cut these. That should make a beautiful seam. And now these pieces that go across the seams, I can cut those as full pieces, right? So yeah, man, fantastic progress. Oh, and I should mention, so the Shaper Origin utilizes vector files, 2D vector files, SVG files, scalable vector graphics, right? And you can Use a lot of different drawing apps like SketchUp, Adobe Illustrator. One of my favorites is Inkscape, Fusion 360, SolidWorks. There's a ton. And now, recently, Shaper has launched their own platform called Shaper Labs. And with Shaper Labs, you'll have access to like 3 million plus SVG files that are already created. And then you can add text and, shapes and get really creative. I am so looking forward to exploring that. Oh, and of course, the Shaper Origin has its own, on-screen design capability to create basic shapes, which I use a ton when I'm making jigs and fixtures. All right, this is a really important clip. You can see how serious I am. And I like to get pieces of tape ready, so I'll just slice some of those. And this motif currently is face up. You can see that. And the seam between the light pink and the darker pink is what I'm going to connect. You'll notice those two thin pieces of wood. I'll show you with longer pieces here in a little bit just how fantastic of an idea that is. So yeah, this piece is upside down and I'm putting the glue in and forcing that into the seam from the back side. And then I can stretch tape across that, pulling the joint type. I'm working as quickly as I can. Smashing that down with a roller and then flipping it over. And now I'm immediately looking for any gaps and I start those areas by taping them. I can sand the two adjoining veneers flush, stretch tape across, use a roller to smash everything down, and add more tape. Lather, rinse, repeat. This worked better than trying to glue from the front. You'll get less glue mashed in the pores that could affect how it looks when you get a finish on it, especially if it's a top coat type finish like a shellac, conversion varnish, or lacquer. And you may have noticed the ever important low raking light to check for flushness and add a simple cal and some weight to make sure it stays just like that. All right, check it out. So I lost this piece and this line here, so this is like ground level. It's gonna go in last and then I was gonna put that piece in. Anyway, I looked for it for a while, couldn't find it. No big shake. What I can do is I've got some more purple over here. And this piece with the tape on it here, it's actually upside down because I want to grab, that's the piece I need, or that's the piece that I had. I want it to match with the grain, so I'm just gonna cut it out right in this area. And so it was just easier for me to put it upside down and not mess with this tape. The machine is reading that tape at the workstation, and you can see I started to cut it here, but I'm just gonna cut another one. And what's cool is I can put this file in, flip it 180 degrees so it's upside down, and boom, I'll cut that piece out right there. How cool is that? All right, here's that piece straight away from the Shaper Origin. And see how that fits? Man, how amazing is that? And not that it matters a whole lot, but you can see this kind of coarse grain running through here. It's going to match up with that. And so I'll marry this piece first and I'll insert this piece last. And more than likely, as soon as I get that piece installed, inserted, I'll find the other one. Feels so good to be at this point. All right, at this stage, I essentially have two halves, the upper and lower, and I can stitch those together from the front, focusing on any gaps, if any, and stretching tape across those areas first. Now, there is a progression of technique. You're going to notice as I'm doing this, I'm learning, and I am doing a full tape on the front, stretching across the seam first, and then adding tape lengthwise with the seam. Now, this approach works best with lighter colors. With dark colors are a little more forgiving, but with lighter colors, you'll have less glue on the face side. So to recap, I just start taping from the front. Pull it across the seam, do a full tape on the front, then I'm adding these strips with clamps, flip this thing over, This is now the back side, and now I can add my glue. I'm literally using the tip of the bottle to squeegee that glue into the seam. You could actually open it up by inserting something underneath and creating a peak, which is a typical way when doing straight seams. A little tricky when the seam is not straight. But there it is, all glued up and ready to go. So here I'm in the process of stitching some veneers together for the back side of the door, right? The front will get the marquetry, the back will get this cherry veneer that creates a balanced panel. And working in a one-man shop, I have to get creative. You may have noticed me flip another piece of veneer over earlier, and this is how I do it. So here I have two 8-foot strips of wood. They're screwed on one end. I can sandwich the veneer in betwixt them, clamp that in place, and that gives me a good handle to flip this over like a big flag. Boom, just like that. So now this is the back side. And I essentially had made two halves, and each seam I'm just breaking it over at the corner of this table, adding my glue, pulling it all together. And then these two final sections, top and bottom section, I can do the same thing. I can't really fold that over completely, but I can just add something here like that and glue it together. And I can immediately start cutting this back veneer to size. I'm just clamping sacrificial strip and using a razor knife to cut that straight and square. You know, there's always pros to anything. This veneer is a little thinner than I would like at 1/42. However, the pro to that con, or the bonus, is that it cuts easily, right? All right, this was a success. This is straight out of the vacuum bag. Now, I used Unibond 1. I like Unibond 1. It creates a rigid glue line and there's no mixing. From there, straight to my panel saw, my sliding table saw, squared it up, and cut it to size. And I can only tell you the relief I felt at this point. Nice. Now I want to add my logo, and it seemed like the Shaper Origin was a perfect tool for this job. Hey, check it out. So for those of you that are wondering or skeptical that the Shaper Origin could possibly be very accurate, let me show you something. So this is my logo, right? And that is about 2 inches wide, long, however you want to look at that, by about 9/16 tall. So what, about 51 millimeters by 14 millimeters, something like that. And I'm using, so that's cutting through 1/42 of an inch veneer, which is 23 thousandths or something. I'm going 21 thousandths deep with an engraving bit. Here's my 0.7 millimeter lead for comparison. Look at the detail. Those tiny little cuts. Man, that is crazy good. So once that was done, I sanded the entire thing with 120, just a quick once over, followed up with 180, making sure that I checked everything with low raking light. There wasn't any glue, there wasn't any little scratches, little dents. Made sure everything was super clean. Pretty straightforward, yeah? Oh, and if you want to see how I kept the dark from migrating into the light as I was sanding, check out my recent YouTube video titled appropriately Sanding Tips. All right, this is getting exciting. At this stage, I have the panel cut. I have a couple of seal coats applied, and I'm just sanding that back using some 220 grit. Once in a while, you get these little nibs, and you can just scrape those loose and then continue sanding. Sometimes I use Scotch-Brite, maroon Scotch-Brite. And this will ultimately get 3 coats, 2 thin seal coats, and then 1 finish coat. And once that finish goes on, bam, it just pops. Check that out. This video was getting kind of long, so I didn't show making the frame. I'm going to do that in a separate video where I use the pan router. But here's the finish. Marquetry motif. Marquetry inlay. It's kind of strange. It's not either one. With using the Shaper Origin, it's kind of its own thing. Since you're cutting pieces, separate pieces, or files, it's almost like puzzle work, right? But no matter what, it's still beautiful. And there it is, 53 by 90, large and in charge. I had my lovely lady stand in front of it just to give it some perspective or scale. And here's the backside of it after it was installed. Not a very pleasing photo, but what I wanted to show you is this bracket that I had to make. Now the opening was 48, but the door needed to extend past the opening by about 9-10 inches to access a light switch. Actually, it was a 3-gang switch plate. So instead of the little upside down T-shaped cheap plastic bracket that they provide, I made one out of aluminum and had it powder coated. This way the slot in the door stays engaged whether it's closed or open, and that worked fantastically well. So after literally months of trial and error and figuring things out, here's the door standing in my shop, and here's another shot of it once it was installed. The owners loved it and I was thrilled. And here is a collection of photos as I progressed through this particular project. I am now very confident to incorporate the Shaper Origin with these thin veneers, and I'm super excited to launch our next project with the team over at Shaper Origin. It'll be a depiction of a high desert scene with Shiprock, which is a national monument. This new collaboration will be available to anyone who's interested in learning this new and exciting concept. I will have veneer packs specific with the right colors for this project and available off my website. And man, I got to tell you, once you learn how to work with these veneers, these 1/42 thin, raw commercial veneers, with their vast selection of species, grain patterns, and dyed colors, and readily available from many different sources, it's easy to see that the sky's the limit to create these pictures, patterns, photo renderings, and beautiful motifs with the Shaper Origin. I am extremely excited to see what you all come up with. Anyway, click the links in the description. And as always, thanks a ton for watching.